Now, hopefully you can see the presentation come up there in front of you. So you've got all of the slides that will go along with today. So of course, as I mentioned, you'll get a copy of the recording today so that you can see the slides from there again if you did want to refresh yourself with any of the content. Now then, before we get into the detail, I'd like to run through an acknowledgement of country. So acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, including their elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the life of this region. Now, a little bit about me. So I am a HR consultant. I've actually been in the field of HR now for just over 20 years. And during that time, I've provided a range of services, including through my own small business, Pauline Tarrant Consulting, which has been operating for over 7 years now. And so as part of the things that I do and have done over that time is as a keynote speaker, speaking at conferences and seminars, offering workshops and training delivery, including webinars like our one today, offering HR health checks in organisations just to see where things are at, see if there's any improvements that can be made within a business, if there's any compliance issues that need to be addressed also. I help organisations with their documentation, so that might be looking at policies, procedures, forms or contracts of employment just to make sure they're the right fit for what the organisation needs in that particular point in time and also sets people up well for the future. I help organisations look at people performance, be that part of reward processes, or sometimes, of course, where people's performance might not be where you'd like it to be. Another element is people technology. So, of course, helping organisations get to grips with their people technology, be that looking at payroll systems, how you set up your pay rules effectively, making sure you comply with all of your legal requirements under any applicable awards or agreements, and also any other HR technology, which of course follows all sorts of other different themes in a business. Could be learning and development, it could be looking at staff engagement, all sorts. I help organisations with their people strategy, and this is a great starting point for any organisation, just to look at where things are at right now, where they need to meet, and having a roadmap for that change process. And wellness at work is a final feature because I'm a qualified yoga instructor, so I love to weave those sorts of themes into my interactions with clients. But that's enough about me, all about helping you today. So our session will be focusing on looking at your safety obligations as employer, and there may well be some COVID-19 questions that pop up towards the end of the presentation. I'll do my very best to answer some of those, but there will be some COVID-specific content that we'll run through as well to help your workplace be as safe as possible in these changing and challenging times. We'll have a look at performance, ways you can boost performance, and also how to address any performance issues, because that's often a first point of contact. People start calling when things have started going wrong. I love helping out when things are going right to help keep things on track, but also happy to help out with issues there. And I'm happy to go through any particular scenarios if we've got time later on today, because sometimes by sharing your stories and what's going on for you, then that actually can provide great learning for others who may be in a similar situation at the moment or may face a similar situation in future. Now, employees have some obligations. So it's likely that most of you have tuned in today because you are running a business where you do have some employees. And one of the first obligations is to follow all legal instructions from their employer. So if you're asking them to do something, provided it is legal and you're asking people to break the law in any way, then they should be following those instructions and following them in the way that you've actually laid them out. It's important that employees also ensure that they don't misuse any kind of company information. That could be breaches of privacy, making contact with clients or other individuals that they shouldn't do outside of their normal course of work. They've also got an obligation to attend work in a punctual and reliable manner. So if that isn't happening, then it's a good time to start having a conversation. And the biggest tip around this is chat to people when things are small, because sometimes it can be resolved very quickly, simply and easily, just over an open, honest conversation about expectations, and then you can all move forward. If things are allowed to fester, it's much more difficult to resolve. there's a wonderful saying of you get the standards you walk past. So the things that you accept every day, that becomes the cultural norm for your business. So have a think about what you want the cultural norms to be in your organisation. Now, employees have some other obligations as well around safety, so they need to be making sure that they undertake their roles in line with legislation, in line with company policy, and that may also include things like good environmental practice, particularly if you've got lots of extra cleaning that's going on, perhaps more cleaning chemicals in your workplace right now, making sure people are using things in a correct and safe way. People are also obliged to provide support to their work colleagues and also provide a good quality of work and work in a safe manner. So they need to, within that safe manner, make sure that they're looking after their own health and safety as well as those around them. So they're not posing any risks to others unnecessarily. They need to follow your instructions as a manager or a business owner around any health and safety matters. They need to take care of their personal protective equipment as well, particularly right now where there may be times where it's difficult to get hold of some PPE. It's really important that people do look after what they have. Employees have got an obligation to report any hazards in the workplace, so it's good to make sure that you've got a process set up for that. It's good to make sure you've also got a careful process for reporting any injuries or ill health at work, particularly right now in COVID-19. If somebody is experiencing COVID-like symptoms, you would want to make sure that that person would let you know as soon as possible so that they can actually stay at home, get tested, get the results through quickly and let you know where things go from there. It's also important that people cooperate when it is a requirement for something to be done for health and safety at the workplace. And one question that I've had crop up a number of times over the past few weeks is, for an employer to provide a safe place of work, can they do things like tell employees that they must download the government's new COVID app? And the guidance so far has been that you can't direct somebody, so you can't instruct somebody to do it and take disciplinary action if they refuse, but you can certainly support those sorts of initiatives that boost the general health and safety within your workplace and in the community around you too. There's some obligations around your obligations towards employees. So you need to be making sure that you are providing people information about the risks and hazards in the workplace, information around the plant that people might be using or equipment that people might be using so that they're not exposed to hazards, providing enough equipment training as well. So, and there may be instructions also around using certain different elements like how to wear PPE correctly or how to use certain chemicals correctly. And supervision is really important, particularly in the early times of a job where somebody is getting used to what they need to be doing to be safe in that workplace. Now, more obligations are around consulting with health and safety representatives. So if you're a larger organisation or perhaps you're in a safety sensitive industry, you may actually decide to gather quite a few of your workers together as a health and safety committee and have formal health and safety representatives because it's a great way of actually getting others to help spread the message around safety in the workplace. Now, it's really important that with the PPE that you are providing to people, with the safety equipment that you are providing to people, that you're doing that without expecting employees to pay. Even if your business is facing challenging times right now, then you still must not and cannot ask for payment for that. And it's important that you look at overall the reduction of any risks and hazards around health within your workplace. Now, there is a responsibility as an employer to inform staff around any changes and inform staff around any complaints, including how to resolve them in a workplace, how to address them correctly, what to do in an emergency. So that may include things like, what is your emergency evacuation plan? Or right now it could include, what do you need to do if somebody does report that they've got COVID and they've been in your workplace? Where do you go? How do you track things down? So you may have a COVID plan that you want to enact, and there are resources available out there. If you do have a search around online where there are some COVID resources. It's good to also have a solid process around what to do if an employee is injured. So making sure that you've got the appropriate documentation and paperwork. And that would also include what happens if that person's actually been exposed to COVID-19 within their work. So let's say you run a hairdresser's right now, you had a client come in and now you've actually had an employee who's gone sick, they've been tested, and you're pretty sure that that link is there between the client and your employee. Then that could be a workers' compensation matter from there. And hopefully they're one of the many that have a reasonable, speedy recovery. But should they not, then there's potential implications there around your claim. And all workers have a right to workers' compensation. So if you've taken somebody on and you haven't yet got your work cover insurance put in place, please have a chat with your insurer, your broker, and get something in place ASAP, because it is a mandatory requirement. Now, in terms of some top tips around COVID in particular, it's good to have a think about risk assessment. So within your workplace, having a think about how would your employees and yourself, of course, be potentially exposed to risk? So is it that you deal with members of the public, or do you have an office-based remote business where you can actually continue everybody working remotely and work in a very low-risk environment? If it is high risk, if you are dealing with members of the public, what can you do to ensure that physical distancing is in place? So this might be a good place to actually have a chat with your employees and go through, okay, let's map out where we think our risk areas are within our interactions with people. It could be delivery drivers, it could be all sorts of other different stakeholders that you have. And then have a look at what you could put in place in each of those scenarios to reduce or eliminate that risk. Another important element to consider at this time is also the mental health impact of COVID. So there may be people perhaps in difficult situations right now. They may be struggling with different levels of mental ill health, and an issue like COVID, where people are actually taken away from their normal support networks, that can actually result in mental ill health. The pressure of the uncertainty right now, the pressure potentially of financial instability right now, these sorts of things can have a significant impact. And mental health is as much an important factor to consider for an employer or manager or a small business owner as physical health. So having a think about what can you do right now, and there's some fantastic support services out there. So for example, if you haven't got an EAP service in place, which is like an employee counselling helpline, there is a service run through Helping Minds for free right now, where you can get up to 3 sessions offered remotely, so by phone or video call, and to offer that support to employees who are having difficult times. And also look at sharing that information with your people, not just when they are in a difficult time, but also with everybody, so they can actually seek help early on. It's important to also think about how you might lawfully discriminate. There may be times where you actually have to discriminate with members of staff. So if you're running a public-facing business, the people that are actually going out there and making potential contact with others, so maybe let's say you run a business where you offer therapeutic massage, which is going to be one of the things that is one of the restrictions that we lifted over the coming weeks. In that kind of business, if you've got somebody with some kind of autoimmune issue, then it may be that you don't let that person come into direct contact with members of the public. You actually may need to discriminate based on the inherent requirements of the role. In fact, that sort of interaction involves some physical contact with people. It's a higher risk situation. And it's important that you document if you are going to make changes based on that, and say, okay, to this person, it may be that we can't return your hours to full hours just yet. It may be to that person, we'd like you to undertake some other duties within the workplace for now, just until we're assured that the risk is actually lower and we don't put you in a difficult situation. It's good to make sure you're screening your workers as they return to work. So let's say you've had a workplace that has been shut, or even if you haven't, it's good to actually screen your workers regularly after a period of absence, just to check, have you been travelling interstate or overseas? Because although we're not meant to be travelling interstate or overseas, there are some people who may be travelling due to compassionate grounds, because there are some exemptions under extreme circumstances. It's good to make sure it's screening people to say, okay, well, maybe you get people to declare when they come into work each day that they are not suffering any symptoms that could be COVID related, such as a fever or any other sort of respiratory issues. And consider supporting flu shots in your workplace. So the flu shot itself is usually free under Medicare, and it's just the time of an organisation coming out to do that. So it may be that you make contact with your local GP or a pharmacy, and you arrange for a certain day for somebody to come into your business to administer that, and it may be that employees can then have that as a deduction off their pay if you're unwilling to fund it yourself. Now, other things that you can do in your workplace, it's really important that people do follow the hand washing principle. This is more important than any hand sanitizer, according to a lot of the medical experts at the moment. So it's good to have your posters up around how to wash hands. Again, great resources online that you can download this. Make sure you've got instructions if people are using PPE. So it's great to provide gloves, but how are people removing those gloves? So they need to have them so that they go inside out, so you're not actually contacting the surface of the gloves when you are removing those gloves. There is a process for doing things like even those simple processes, just to make sure you're safe. And it's good to up your cleaning practices. So even if you don't have many people coming into your business as clients from outside, even if it is mainly your employees, there may still be people coming in, there may still be couriers or people picking up recycling. If you've got shredded paper, all sorts of bits and pieces, there can be all sorts of touch points where people enter your business. And even your own employees may be bringing in some germs into the work environment, even if it's just the winter flu. Then it is important that good cleaning practices are in place and endorsed by others too. Now, if you're in a situation where you are allowing people to work remotely right now, whether that's a home-based office or other setup, then make sure that people are actually set up correctly. There have been successful workers' compensation claims in the past where people have been working from a home office and they've injured themselves. So it is essential to have a think about, okay, what can we do to make sure people are safe? So sending them out information on how to have a good ergonomic setup so that you're not all hunched up with your keyboard at the wrong level, or people are not just working off laptops. If you're there with a keyboard and a laptop all day, it's really not very good for your neck and shoulders. And with your employees, it's good to be open around what your expectations are. So when people shouldn't be turning up to work. So what sort of symptoms, at what point you'd expect people to go and perhaps consider a test, or what symptoms when you'd actually be expecting people to stay at home. You may also like to share news with your staff. So out there's all sorts of fake news around, do you consume disinfectant, and all sorts of terrible fake things that are spreading some really inappropriate information out there right now. So it's great to be able to counter some of that, and you may decide that you want to just display some information from the health department in your workplace or in your virtual workplace. So if you're using Microsoft Teams, for example, which is a fantastic tool right now to keep in touch with people, you can use that almost as a digital notice board and post information up on there that can guide your staff through what the real facts are from reputable sources. Now, that covers off some of the safety elements, and I'm happy to take some more questions a little later on. But to make sure that we keep to time today, because I'm sure you're all busy people with lots of things to do within your day, then we'll also look at some other elements around performance. Now, in terms of looking at performance, there's some great things that you can ask yourself as a leader that will help you to provide an engaging workplace. And there's also some great ways of measuring employee engagement. And these questions actually link up to the Gallup Q12 survey, which is a fantastic tool to highlight where there may be any engagement issues in your workplace. So the sorts of things to build an engaged workplace where you can really get high performance is making sure expectations are clear. That could be expectations around the work right now, or it could be expectations around safety protocols right now. And it's important that people have the materials and equipment to do their work right. And we do hear about all sorts of situations where perhaps people don't have the right materials and equipment, and that can be a real distraction for people. I'm quite glad I'm not in the UK at the moment, because the local hospital where a lot of my family members are, they're having to use improvised shower curtains as gowns and all sorts of bits and pieces. So they don't have the right equipment and materials and PPE to keep them safe. So it's going to be a distraction. There's going to be fear and worry going on in people's minds right now, and in a time where they really need to focus on the job at hand. So if you're providing the right kind of materials and equipment, that could be a great ergonomic workstation for people. It may be that you've provided them a screen to use from home, so they're not in a poor position using a laptop or a great chair. It could be that you've ordered in extra supplies of other elements that are important in your workplace. It could be extra gloves, for example. And in your workplaces, another point of reflection for leaders and business owners is having a think about, are people having the opportunity to do their best every day? You may have people right now that are really great at planning. They love to keep their eye on what's going on in the news and all of this sort of things. And you've probably got enough other stuff going on. So how can you potentially redeploy staff to tap into their really great skill sets? You may have some that are really finicky about process and procedure. Well, maybe they're the people to help make sure that some safety elements are covered off in your workplace. Of course, ultimately, it's your responsibility as a business owner, but there's nothing wrong with getting some help along the way. It's great to offer recognition too, and having a think about what you can do, even if you're working virtually and physically away from your team. There are ways that you can still reward and recognise great work. That could be through public means, on public discussions on Teams, for example, if you use that platform, or other similar chat platforms in place. Or it may be that there's private acknowledgement. But the most important way of acknowledging people is to be very factual and detailed in how you do that. Not just thanks for a great job, but thanks so much for providing a great level of customer support to that person that is having a difficult time right now. That's really helped provide a really good experience for that person that they can hopefully tell others about. Having a level of care is important, and that's where the safety comes in with the session that we're running today. If you're putting the right things in place, making sure you've got hand sanitizer if people need to physically attend work, making sure you tell people about the increases in cleaning that's happening so that people really do feel safe and cared about, then that can really help that person feel more connected to their work and their workplace. And now is a great time to consider development too. So as I mentioned, if you've got people who perhaps have got some natural talent in certain areas, this is a great way to encourage development in those particular areas by allowing people to take on new and different elements that present themselves in the workplace to you today. In the workplace, opinions are important, even if they might not always be what you want to hear right now. There may be people where you want everybody in work right now, and there may be some others that perhaps don't feel comfortable. But it's important to listen to people and hear people out. Sometimes just listening to how things go, sometimes letting people talk it out, they can actually help resolve things themselves. They might go, I really don't feel safe coming into work, but letting them talk, they might go, but if I do X, Y, and Z, then that will help me feel safer. Maybe I could just come into work 2 days a week. I could do remote for the remaining 3 days per week, for example, and then that might be a good conclusion. The mission or purpose is an interesting one right now. And there's so many organisations doing great work where there's, for example, one organisation is a restaurant that's offering some takeaway food, and they're offering free delivery to vulnerable members of the community so they don't actually have to come into the restaurant at that particular point in time. So many wonderful examples of that really are helping employees to feel like they're making a big difference in this whirlwind of change and challenge that we've seen over the last few weeks and months. Another element is that people feel like they're part of a winning team. That's important. So people need to feel like their colleagues, their peers are actually committed to doing quality work. And that's where doing some remedial performance management with people that are not quite making the grade is important. Now, it's great for people to feel supported and feel like they've got a friendly ear at work if they are having difficult times. So having a best friend at work seems like a bit of an odd aim for a manager, but it is good for your employees to feel like they've got somebody that they can trust in the workplace. It's good to check in with your team and have a chat about people's progress, where they've come from, where you see them going, and give those employees also opportunities to learn and grow. And right now, there's so many opportunities. So if your staff are off work at the moment, unable to attend, there's still a time where they can learn and grow. There are some wonderful online free resources right now through Business Station and also through many other providers. There's even universities offering free short courses. So it's a great way for people to upskill. And by really engaging with your team, you can actually switch things around. So if you've got a workforce that's actually a little bit difficult, let's say, or maybe disengaged, then the more you show you care, the more you show that you listen, the more involved you make people, you'll actually end up helping people create a real sense of enthusiasm and create a sense of ownership. And now's the perfect time to think about that as part of your culture, because we're moving into uncertain times. We're having to pivot and shift our businesses to operate in new and different ways. And so if you can involve your employees as part of that process, it's a great way of actually engendering that sense of ownership. And there was a great example several years ago with the Mercedes plant over in South Africa, where they'd been besieged by all sorts of problems over the years. The plant had all sorts of reliability issues. There were terrible quality issues that would happen. And then they decided that the workers decided they wanted to make a car for Nelson Mandela when he became president. And so the workers all decided they were going to volunteer their time. The managers decided they would agree to donate the parts. And this was just another car rolling off the production line. But to all the people involved, it was so much more. And that meaning, that purpose actually meant that they all decided, all the workers that were at that plant for many, many years said that was the best car that ever rolled off the production line. It's just another car, but the purpose was different. So having a think about how you can bring some purpose into your business right now is a great thing to do. Now, with your people, it's good to set the expectations, and this is a great way of offering some certainty in uncertain times. So what are your expectations in terms of deliverables? It may be that you set them in the past, but now we're in a slightly different operating environment, which is also subject to more change. What are your expectations day by day, week by week? It could be in terms of deliverables of certain items, of responding to so many calls. It could be other outputs that you can measure and manage. It's important to review that progress and use that time to check in with people and to be able to praise great performance where it's happening and also correct any performance issues at an early stage. And then have a review, are these the right KPIs for us? Is this the right kind of goal? Is this the right kind of outcome for us? And you start again. And in terms of setting some meaningful KPIs for your people right now, then looking at being specific is important. So making sure you hone in on the details so that people understand, they actually know what you are wanting to have delivered. Measurable. Now, this is where a lot of people find it quite difficult, and it does take a bit of brain power to get to how do we measure the output. But it's a really great thing to put in place, because really, I guess workplaces have often relied upon the presence of a human in the workplace. So people have often been rewarded in workplaces because they work long hours, not necessarily because their output was amazing. Whereas now, where businesses are starting to work potentially virtually or more remotely, then having a more measurable set of deliverables is becoming more and more important. And over time, it is a skill that can be developed and enhanced. So if that's something that you need to look at as a manager, then there are great resources out there online available, or if your managers need to look at it too. It's important that your goals are achievable, they're realistic, they're time bound. So it isn't just that we need you to achieve X, Y, and Z, there needs to be a deadline to it as well. So for looking at your people, you may have times where you need to change the person. So you may have people that are in your business that are drifting right now. Maybe it's not really what they're cut out to do. It might be that they're not really that motivated by the work or the work environment. So it may be that there's times where that's change needed. But it's important to also think about the people that are doing really great and making sure you acknowledge them. So these are the people that have got a real intent to stay, they're putting in a whole load of discretionary effort, and they can be seen as true believers for your business. They're probably a brand advocate for you. So looking at how you retain them is just every bit as important as how you may change people in the bottom corner. And of course, change doesn't necessarily have to be that person exits the business. It may be that a well-worded, timely conversation can help move them up towards becoming an achiever or a true believer. Now, if you are entering into performance management in a formal basis, then it's very important to stick to the facts. And so on Monday, the 23rd of April, then I noticed that you came in late, and that was also happening the next day. My expectation is that you're in work for 8:30 a.m. every morning, but I seem to see over time that you tend to be at least 10 minutes late. I'd love to find out a little bit more about why that might be, but I'd also like to explore in a bit more detail what the impact is on the organisation and the rest of your team members when that happens. So then that person can understand the context, understand your expectations going forward, and it's good to set a time frame for that person to improve. So you can say, look, over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to monitor your timekeeping, then we're going to sit down and have another conversation about this to look at how we embed the right behaviours for the long term. And in that conversation, you may ask people things like, what are you doing right now that's helping you get to work on time? What can we do to make sure this is a sustainable, positive change? It may be in some situations people need some additional training to help to up their performance or up their outputs within a particular task or role. And please, please, please document it. It's good to always document any kind of formal conversations, even if it's just a diary note somewhere in the early stages. It's really important. Now, there's some good resources available through Fair Work, and there is a Fair Work dismissal code for small businesses. So that's if you've got less than 15 employees. And that's useful even if you're doing performance management, because it actually steps you through the process that you would eventually need to follow. So it would go through performance management, or if it's been down to a misconduct issue, so let's say if there's an issue of theft or something like that, it'll actually help step you through the process there. Now, it's good to keep up to date on what your obligations are, and so you can register for Fair Work updates. So if there are any changes around compliance areas for you and your business, you can attend employment law update sessions, and Business Station have all sorts of different update sessions that run from time to time. And the ATO also offers some great sessions around your obligations in the workplace, and that's very much from a payroll perspective, which is quite important because one of the things that was on the radar really was around wage theft back before COVID really came. So I think that may well feature again in time as things settle down. I did mention some sources of help out there, so Helping Minds. If you don't have an employee assistance program in place, then this is free for everybody. As long as you're in WA or the Northern Territory, then you can make contact. So if you are struggling at the moment, and let's face it, it's not an easy time to be running a business, then you can give them a call. Your family members can give them a call if they are struggling right now, and your employees. So feel free to go onto the Helping Minds website, and you can print this off, send it around to your staff in an email or whatever format that you use for communication right now. So that's available. Or of course, if you've already got an EAP service, you've got that there. So right now, we could be seen to be dealing with a crisis, or perhaps it's an opportunity for change. There really are some wonderful businesses out there right now that are doing some really interesting things. And one of them is actually an organisation down in Collie. and they are a winery and also started setting up their distillery last year to make gin, and now they're making hand sanitizer. So they've really been able to pivot and shift and change over these past few weeks to offer something new and something needed in the market. And so perhaps that's something that you could consider as part of your business. And I'm sure your team may be able to come up with some great ideas. So now we've hit the point of being 45 minutes into our presentation just about. So we have got plenty of time for Q&A, and I'll also be posting up some really useful resources in the chat box so that you can actually look at those and see if they're useful for your workplace too. So thank you so much for listening along so far, and let's bring up questions. So feel free to tap your questions in the box there, and as you do that, then I will also share some of the resources I mentioned. So I'll just copy them over for you now. So hopefully the presentation has actually given you some potential thinking points. And I'm just waiting for this to come up now. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming up so far, but what we can do is we can actually unmute you. So if you'd prefer to actually ask a question rather than typing it into the box, then that's absolutely fine too. And you'll see in the chat box also, there is the safe work information up there. Right, just got a question come through now. Great, okay. How to ensure the workload is contributed fairly amongst staff members when different departments are busier than others during a pandemic? Yes, that is a really interesting challenge and question. And with that, it's important to consider I guess a number of different factors in that. So it depends how long that might be. If you think that this is just a short-term issue, then that's something that you may be able to redistribute some tasks just over the short term. If it's too difficult, then you may decide just to keep it split so that your busy department stays busy, and you're also within your rights to negotiate a change to the working conditions with staff if you have got a department that is less busy. So I've got a client, for example, they have got one particular service that is well funded. They are a not-for-profit organisation. Another one that is actually, they need to go out and deliver face-to-face interactions with people in the community, and it has to be face-to-face. And that service is actually not running right now. So those staff have actually had to they've entered into conversations to talk about reducing hours, and they've agreed to that, and that's all been documented down. If you are going to make any changes to your working terms and conditions for staff, then please make sure that you've got that all documented in writing and signed off by that individual. It just saves some issues further on down the track. You can make a verbal contract, but then what does that mean? How do you prove anything if anything else comes up? Now, I did have a note up in the chat box around the link, so I'll just pop that out there again. Okay, so hopefully you've got the safe work link up there now. So apologies for that, Teresa. So feel free to keep typing any questions up in the Q&A box or pop things in the chat box if that's easier. Now, I mean, in terms of the, just going back to that first question, because this is one that I could probably spend the next hour answering, to be quite honest, because my gosh, all workplaces really are quite different. If you think that the change where one department is going to be much quieter long term, then it may be that you might need to start thinking about what your ongoing baseload of staffing is. And sometimes working with staff members, you may have some that are going, look, you know what, I'm okay with my financial circumstances right now. I'm happy to drop down to 2 days per week from my full-time hours, and then others within the team might be able to pick up more hours that might be in a financially difficult and different situation. Another thing that you could do is also look at annual leave. So if you have got individuals who have got an annual leave balance outstanding and they have there's not so much of a requirement for their work right now in the workplace, then encouraging them to take that leave is a great way of them being able to get paid. Now, hopefully you're in a position where you haven't been too impacted by things. If you do fit the criteria for JobKeeper, you can still apply. So please go online. There's lots of information on the ATO website right now where you can actually have a look at your eligibility as an organisation. So if you've, now most small businesses will be under the trading threshold, luckily. So if you've suffered a 30% or greater drop versus last year, and it doesn't have to be right now, it could be over the coming months. So if your drop-off isn't likely to hit until June, for example, because you're still finishing off agreed to work and it's just that the next few months coming are looking less, then you can actually register that so that your JobKeeper actually kicks in at a different point in time. So there's plenty of options to look at there. Now, I've got another question up on here. When do I predict people can go back to work in the normal workplace in the near future? Oh, wow. That is an interesting question. So there are discussions happening right now with the different state governments and also including New Zealand to look at a variety of different elements. And on the news this morning, they did mention that Friday might be a time where restrictions start being lifted. Now, it all depends, of course, in terms of what your normal workplace actually does. And so if you're running a pub or a nightclub, for example, it looks unlikely for some time that you will be opening, because it's one of those things where after a few drinks, people tend to love to, get a little bit more in the way of physical contact, hugging each other and all the rest. And that's where there could be increased spread of disease. So it could be that we might see other lower risk elements open up before then. So it may be, for example, that physios is one where there's hands-on work, but it's one-on-one, and you can control that to a degree in terms of clients would answer a questionnaire when they come into that particular facility to make sure that they're not suffering any symptoms and then wouldn't be putting workers at risk. Similar with chiropractors and other sorts of practitioners like that. So those are seen to be quite important therapeutic services that are out there. It may be that provided you can offer suitable space, so they have that wonderful analogy that it's every person needs about a ute tray of space. So provided you can offer that kind of physical distancing to people, then it may be that you can actually start opening up an office environment or other environments. So a lot of it will depend on physical distancing and also your contact with clients. If the case numbers remain low, then the politicians are saying, well, it's something that might happen sooner rather than later. And of course, they are also talking about the COVID app. So if more people download that, then it's also going to buy us a little more freedom a little earlier. It does look positive for more places opening up over the next few weeks. Now, I do have a question here about JobKeeper. So the JobKeeper question is around ensuring 30% reduction in revenue across the 6 months or only in April. Look, you've just got to have a look at what your predictions will be. Just be a little bit mindful that if you think you just had a little drop off in April and then everything's going to be fine, you're going to be having less than 30% going forward after that. If you are found by the tax office that you haven't had sufficient dip in revenue over a sustained period of time, then they may well come and ask for the money back. It's all a little bit vague at the moment because the legislation was actually passed incredibly quickly. So it doesn't have the normal level of detail that you'd see where these sorts of measures are put in place. But the ATO website is definitely the best place to see. And then you can have a look at the criteria. Yeah, it is a matter of you doing a bit of an assessment. So you might go, well, is it worth me going through this process if it's only April that I've been impacted? And maybe keep back some money just in case you did need to reimburse the ATO if things did really pick up. It's great that you're thinking that maybe things might be positive, that April is only the impacted month, and hopefully that is the case for you. Now, we've still got a few minutes left, so if you have got more questions, feel free to pop them in the box. And I can actually share in a moment the... oh, okay, so we've got another question in here. Do you think that in May, if we move forward and business is back to normal, we might not be eligible for JobKeeper? Well, that is an interesting one, actually, because with that, it's just all about having a crystal ball at the moment. We're dealing with so much ambiguity. It could be that there would be a change, and the ATO website is getting updated regularly. So as soon as the JobKeeper payments start coming through, there may be the option to actually declare earnings on a month-by-month basis, where perhaps if things do pick up, then you would then declare that through, and then your JobKeeper payments could stop. So it's great if you are in a situation where you think things will actually bounce back to normal and be having less than that. So at the moment, the ATO is just asking for your predictions going forward. So if you think, based on the information you know today, that you're going to have that 30% reduction going forward, that's what you go with. If it's different in time, then that'll be tackled further down the track. Okay, so still time for some questions. So we've got a couple of moments left. So please get your questions in now while you can. And I might just quickly share my screen again, just to show you the resource that I posted up on the screen. So it's a handy little checklist around what you can do to keep people safe. And it is important that you do consider these sorts of elements, so all around your cleaning, looking at your monitoring of symptoms and so on and so forth. And so this is from Safe Work Australia, so this is applicable really in any state or territory across the nation. And it's a really useful little COVID list there. Now, okay, so I've got another question in the chat box, sorry, in the Q&A box here. So if we have employees on JobKeeper, can we still enforce they use their annual leave? So you can direct people in certain circumstances to use annual leave. So if, for example, they've got excess annual leave, then under certain awards you can do that. Please check your award first because it does change. So some make sure that you need to have had 8 weeks leave, and others it's less than that. So it's worth having a think about that first. Now, if you've got someone on JobKeeper, yeah, I mean, if they were wanting, if let's say JobKeeper topped them up for 3 days a week and you didn't have any work for days 4 and 5 and you just wanted to get rid of that leave liability, then you could enter into a discussion with employees. You could look at payout of annual leave on top of that. So there are a couple of options that that you could look at, but be a little bit careful around making unilateral changes to people's work. So that being unilateral changes to their terms and conditions or their leave. Now, I've got another question that has actually popped up on chat around suggestions for what sort of professional development people should be covering off for staff members in this time. So I guess every business professional will tell you something a little bit different. From my perspective, in an organisation, it's all about looking at your areas of risk. So health and safety training is something that's quite important right now. So if you are having people in your work environment, making sure that they are trained in the PPE they're expected to wear, those sorts of compliance matters are really, really important. Other elements that are actually quite important are looking at different elements of risk. So risk, as I mentioned, doesn't just come in terms of safety to physical form, but also mental health as well. So having a look at your bullying and harassment policies and how you actually train those out to staff members. There have been cases go through court where business owners have been found liable to corporate manslaughter because of criminal negligence, basically around not tackling bullying in the workplace. So making sure that your staff are aware of what respectful behaviour looks like, what to do if behaviour of concern does come up. And this can not just be limited to bullying, it could be any kind of discrimination or harassment. And there's multiple layers of legislation that underpin these, and there can be significant claims for discrimination in the workplace, as well as issues around safety matters too. So now is the perfect time. If you've got employees off work on JobKeeper, have a think about those particular areas. And I have got another question around, are there any free resources for this? There is information available on the Fair Work website. So if you go on there, there's even some modules that you can work through. Some of them are really quite detailed and probably more suitable for yourself as a business owner or a manager to make sure that you're familiar with the legislative requirements, because they are quite intense. But you can always run through those and then do a condensed version of training for your employees. You could run that through a platform like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or there's even another one called Blue Jeans. There's all sorts of other different low-cost platforms where you can actually run training. You can record it just like we're recording this session today, and then you can send it out to people ongoing. So although it might be a bit of time and effort, then there is the possibility to be able to reuse that in future and perhaps incorporate that as part of your standard induction for employees going forward. You can also use the time to create training that's bespoke for your business. So if you've got certain things, certain expectations around the workplace, it could be, for example, around your social media policy. If you are a consumer organisation, you're dealing with members of the public. If you are, let's say, a cafe or a bar or something like that, there may be certain things that you're happy for your employees to share and become brand ambassadors to help spread the word. It's a great way of using some informal marketing. But you might also want to talk to them about what happens when they might consider posting things online that might be derogatory. So there have been a lot of cases where there's been claims of unfair dismissal in the workplace because people have been terminated because of things they've said about their employer, often including some expletives along the way, posts on Facebook, so on and so forth. And even without mentioning the employer's name in writing, if it sort of clearly states that a person works for a certain organisation, you can join the dots quite easily, then workers have actually failed in their bid for an unfair dismissal claim, and employers have been within their rights to terminate. So having a sort of a bit of a think. So if you've got the time right now to have a bit of a reflection on what the behavioural expectations you've got of your staff are, then it's a good time to look at that. Okay, so we've just got a couple of moments to go before we need to tie things up. So if you can get your fingers on the button there and tap away your questions in the Q&A box, then that would be great. Okay, I think we've actually answered all the questions now. Wonderful. And also mention around current job seekers, not keepers. How easy is it to maintain this? Now, the best place to go for information on job seekers is to go on to the services.gov.au website. That's got a whole load of information on there. So if you're in a situation where you're looking to make that claim, that separate claim through Centrelink, there's a whole big COVID page which has got loads of super helpful information on eligibility and who this, what the payment looks like and things like that. Job seekers is actually less than job keepers. So if you're in a situation where perhaps you had employees, you made them redundant, and they've gone on to job seekers, you can actually reinstate them pretty much at no cost as part of the job keepers program, which is a great way of actually retaining your staff and those skilled people that perhaps you've trained up. Then they would, of course, lose their ability to claim the job seekers, but that staff member would just be responsible for going back and informing Centrelink of their change of payment, of their new income levels. And there are resources available around looking at re-engaging people, and you can actually reclaim, you can enter into agreement to reclaim that redundancy money as well. So if you've got somebody who'd actually got maybe, let's say, 5 years service, and you've gone and you paid out a whole load of redundancy pay, then you could look at going, okay, well, that redundancy pay, we're actually reallocating that now. We're reinstating you on the payroll, and that redundancy pay is instead paid, so we have effectively paid you for the period of time that we needed to keep you paid to be eligible for JobKeepers. So that is a possibility there, and a great way of actually keeping people engaged right now. And if you're unable to take everybody back on, the ability for individuals to go and get job seekers support payments, that is reasonably easy. So a lot of the criteria that was there in the past for evidence is not there now. So it used to be that there would need to be a form filled in from the employer to prove the reason for termination, but that form requirement has actually been taken away temporarily. Partly because I don't think Centrelink can cope with all the paperwork, but also because it drags out the process, and people need that money ASAP to help keep their bills paid, help keep a roof over their head. Now, with that, that brings us to 12 o'clock. That brings us to the end of our seminar today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate you taking the time. Don't forget to look at the recording if you wanted to revisit any of this information. And also, please remember that the information today is very general in nature. I don't know the intricacies of your businesses. And of course, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty out there right now. So nothing's legal or financial advice in any way or mean, but hopefully it's given you some pointers, some information, and helped guide you in the right direction to help you and your businesses be your best in these challenging times. So please take care, and please wash your hands. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.